Welcome to Park Ranger Files, where I document the most chilling and unexplained encounters reported from America's national forests and wilderness areas. Stories that remind us some places were never meant to be disturbed. Story 1. I worked for the National Park Service for 17 years before what happened in the Bridger Wilderness made me turn in my badge. I'd spent nearly 2 decades patrolling some of the most remote country in Wyoming, places where you could hike for a week without seeing another human being. I loved it. The solitude, the rawness, the feeling that you were one of the last people on Earth experiencing true wilderness. But there are some things in those wild places that we're not supposed to see. Things that have been there longer than we have, and don't take kindly to being disturbed. It started in late September when I got assigned to investigate reports of illegal camping in an area we called the Devil's Kitchen. It's a box canyon about 15 miles from the nearest trailhead, surrounded by sheer granite walls on 3 sides. Beautiful country, but treacherous. The canyon floor is littered with deadfall from avalanches, and the only water source is a creek that runs ice cold, even in summer. We didn't allow camping there because of the danger, but every few years, some idiot would ignore the signs and set up anyway. The report came from a thru hiker who'd gotten lost and accidentally wandered into the canyon. He said he'd seen multiple tents set up in a clearing, maybe 6 or 7, all arranged in a perfect circle around a fire pit. What bothered him enough to report it wasn't just that people were camping illegally. It was that, when he called out to them, nobody answered. He said he could see shadows moving inside the tents, silhouettes backlit by lanterns. But not one person came out or responded to his shouting. He got spooked and hiked out, filing a report at the ranger station the next day. I took a rookie ranger named Marcus with me. He was fresh out of training, eager to prove himself, and I figured this would be a good experience for him. We packed light, planning to hike in, issue citations, and hike back out the same day. The weather was perfect, clear skies and cool temperatures, and we made good time on the trail. We reached the canyon entrance around noon and immediately noticed something off. The air felt wrong. That's the best way I can describe it. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees from when we'd entered the canyon, and there was this pressure in the atmosphere, like the feeling you get right before a thunderstorm. But the sky was still clear. No clouds, no wind, just this oppressive heaviness, pressing down on everything. Marcus noticed it too. He kept looking up at the sky, confused, asking if I thought a storm was rolling in. I told him I didn't know. We found the campsite exactly where the hiker had described it. 7 tents arranged in a perfect circle, each one facing inward toward a stone fire pit in the center. The tents were modern, expensive gear, the kind serious backpackers use. But they looked wrong somehow. Too clean, too new, like they'd just been unpacked from their stuff sacks and set up that morning. Except the report was 3 days old. I called out, identified myself as a park ranger, said we needed to talk to whoever was camping here. Nothing. Complete silence. Not even the sound of birds or insects, which I didn't register as strange until later. Just absolute quiet, except for the creek burbling in the background. Marcus and I exchanged looks. He was nervous, I could tell, but trying to act professional. I approached the nearest tent and knocked on the support pole. "Park Service, we need you to come out, please." Still nothing. I unzipped the tent fly and looked inside. Empty. Sleeping bag laid out neatly, a backpack in the corner, but no person. I checked the next tent. Same thing. Empty. Gear arranged carefully, but no occupants. Marcus was checking tents on the other side of the circle, and I could hear him calling out that his were empty too. All 7 tents were unoccupied. But here's what made my skin crawl. Each tent had a lantern inside, turned on, even though it was the middle of the day. And in each tent, there was a journal lying open on top of the sleeping bag. I picked up the one in the first tent I'd checked. The handwriting was neat, precise, and the entry was dated that morning. Day 7 in the kitchen. We can hear it moving outside the circle at night now. It's getting bolder. We keep the lanterns on because the light seems to keep it at bay. We take turns staying awake, watching. When the sun comes up, it retreats back into the woods. We know we should leave, but we can't. Every time we try to pack up, we forget why we wanted to leave. It's like the canyon doesn't want us to go. Or maybe we don't want to go. It's hard to tell anymore. I felt ice water run down my spine. I called Marcus over and showed him the journal. He read it, looked at me with wide eyes, and said we needed to get out of there and call for backup. I agreed, but something made me check the other journals first. They all said similar things. Different handwriting, different voices, but the same message. They'd been there for a week. They were being watched. Something was in the woods. The light kept them safe. The last journal I read had an entry that stopped me cold. We saw the ranger today. He came into the circle and started reading our journals. We watched him from the trees. He doesn't know we're not in the tents anymore. We haven't been in the tents sitting for 3 days. We can't go back in the tents. It won't let us. We have to stay in the woods now. We have to watch. We have to wait. I looked up from the journal and saw them. 7 people standing at the edge of the clearing, just inside the tree line. They were perfectly still, watching us. They wore hiking clothes, carried no gear, and their faces were completely blank. No expression, no emotion. Just empty stares fixed on Marcus and me. Marcus saw them too. He grabbed my arm, voice shaking, asking who they were. I didn't answer because I was staring at their feet. They weren't touching the ground. All 7 of them were hovering about 6 inches above the forest floor, swaying slightly like they were suspended on invisible strings. I've been in dangerous situations before. I've faced down aggressive bears, talked armed poachers into surrendering, pulled injured hikers off cliff faces. But I've never felt fear like I did in that moment. It was primal, absolute, the kind of terror that bypasses your rational brain and goes straight to the part that knows when you're looking at something that shouldn't exist. I told Marcus to walk, not run, back toward the canyon entrance. We kept our eyes on those 7 figures as we backed away. They didn't move, didn't follow, just watched us with those empty faces. We made it about 50 yards before Marcus broke and ran. I ran too. We didn't stop until we were out of the canyon and back on the main trail. We reported what we saw. A full team went back the next day, including search and rescue, medical personnel, and law enforcement. They found nothing. No tents, no fire pit, no journals. Just an empty clearing in the Devil's Kitchen, undisturbed, like nobody had been there in years. They searched for 3 days and found no trace of the 7 people we'd seen. I was put on administrative leave, pending a psychiatric evaluation. They thought the altitude had gotten to me, or maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing. But Marcus backed up my story, every detail. And he was a rookie with no reason to lie. They eventually cleared us both, wrote it off as a shared misunderstanding of what we'd seen, and I was allowed to return to work. But I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I went into the backcountry, I'd think about those 7 figures hovering at the edge of the trees. I'd wonder what they were waiting for, what they were watching for. I'd wonder if they were still there, standing in that clearing, suspended above the ground, patient and eternal. I submitted my resignation 2 months later. I work in a sporting goods store now, selling camping gear to people who are excited about their weekend trips into the wilderness. Sometimes they ask me for recommendations on where to camp, remote spots away from the crowds. I always steer them toward the popular areas, the places with rangers nearby and established campsites. I never mention the Devil's Kitchen. I never tell them that there are some places in the wilderness where the rules we understand don't apply, where something else is in charge, and where setting up a tent in the wrong clearing might mean you never leave. Marcus quit too. Last I heard, he moved to Florida and got a job as a lifeguard, somewhere flat, open, and crowded. Somewhere you can see for miles in every direction, and there's nowhere for anything to hide. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in the wilderness? And when you looked, saw something that made you question everything you thought you knew about the natural world? Story 2. My grandfather was a fire lookout in the Bitterroot National Forest for 32 years. He manned a tower on Sheep Mountain from 1952 until 1984, spending 6 months out of every year alone in a 14 by 14 foot cabin 60 feet in the air. People always asked him if he got lonely up there, if the isolation drove him crazy. He'd just smile and say the solitude was exactly what he needed. What he never told anyone, except me on his deathbed, was that he wasn't alone up there. Not really. I was 23 when Grandpa called me to the hospital. He had lung cancer, the bad kind, and the doctor said he had maybe a week left. My whole family was there, taking shifts, but Grandpa asked to see me alone. He said he had something to tell me, something he'd been carrying for 30 years, and he needed to pass it on before he died. He told me about the summer of 1977. It had been a dry year, dangerous fire conditions, and he was on high alert. He'd spot smoke on the horizon and call it in, watch the crews scramble to contain it before it spread. It was exhausting work, staying vigilant 24 hours a day, knowing that one missed plume of smoke could mean disaster. In late July, he started noticing something strange. Every night around midnight, he'd see lights moving through the forest below. Not flashlights or campfires, but lights that moved through the trees at impossible angles, sometimes vertical, sometimes seeming to pass through solid trunks. At first, he thought it was poachers or illegal hunters, so he'd radio the ranger station. They'd send someone out to investigate, but they never found anything. The lights kept appearing night after night, always around midnight, always moving in strange patterns. Grandpa started documenting them, keeping a log of when they appeared, how many there were, what direction they moved. After 2 weeks, he noticed a pattern. The lights were moving in a spiral, getting closer to his tower with each appearance. Then one night they reached the base of his tower. He was doing his evening rounds, scanning the horizon for smoke, when he looked down and saw them directly below. There were dozens of lights, maybe hundreds, all gathered in a circle around the tower's foundation. They pulsed in rhythm, like they were breathing, and Grandpa said he could feel the tower vibrating in sync with their pulsing. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk with his radio in hand, watching those lights through the floor grates. They stayed until just before dawn, then dispersed back into the forest. He called the ranger station at first light, told them what he'd seen, demanded they send someone up to investigate. They said they'd send a crew when they could spare one, but they were stretched thin, dealing with fire calls. The lights came back the next night, and the next, always gathering at the base of the tower, always pulsing in that same rhythm. Grandpa said he started to hear them on the fourth night. Not sound exactly, but something he felt in his bones, a vibration that resonated in his chest and made his teeth ache. It was like a voice, but not one made by vocal cords. It was trying to communicate something, trying to make him understand. On the seventh night, one of the lights came up the tower stairs. Grandpa heard the metal steps ringing with footsteps, slow and deliberate. Climbing toward the cabin, he grabbed the fire axe he kept for emergencies and stood by the trap door, heart hammering in his chest. The footsteps reached the platform outside his door. They stopped. The door handle turned. Grandpa said he should have used the axe, should have defended himself, but when the door opened, he couldn't move. The light that entered wasn't blinding, but it filled every corner of the cabin, and within that light was a shape. Not human, not animal, but something in between. It had mass and form, but they shifted constantly, never settling into anything his brain could properly process. The thing stood in his doorway for what felt like hours. Grandpa said it was looking at him, studying him even though he couldn't see anything like eyes. And then it spoke. Not with a voice, but directly into his mind, bypassing his ears entirely. It showed him things. Images, feelings, concepts he didn't have words for. It showed him the forest as it had been thousands of years ago, before humans, before roads and towers and fire suppression. It showed him the forest burning, natural cycles of destruction and renewal that had played out for millennia. And it showed him what would happen if the fires stopped. If humans kept preventing the natural burns, the forest would become choked with deadwood and undergrowth, primed for a catastrophic fire that would destroy everything. The entity, whatever it was trying to maintain the balance. The lights he'd been seeing were them, moving through the forest, doing what fires used to do, clearing away the dead, making room for new growth. But humans kept stopping them. Every time they tried to work, rangers and fire crews would interfere, putting out the fires before they could complete their cycle. The entity was frustrated, angry even, and it had come to Grandpa because he was the eyes of the fire suppression effort. He was the one who called in the locations, who directed the crews to stop what needed to happen. Grandpa said the entity gave him a choice. He could continue calling in every fire, fighting the natural order, and eventually the forest would die from his efforts. Or he could be selective. Let certain fires burn, allow the balance to be maintained. In exchange, the entity would protect him. No fire would ever harm his tower. He'd be safe while he helped them do what needed to be done. He took the deal. For the next 7 years, until he retired, Grandpa would spot fires and make a decision. Some he'd report immediately. Others he'd watch for a few hours, letting them burn before calling them in. He learned to tell which fires were started by lightning, by human carelessness, or by the entities. The entity fires burned in specific patterns, moved in ways that natural fires didn't, and targeted specific areas that needed clearing. The lights never bothered him again. They'd appear in the distance sometimes, going about their work, but they never came back to his tower. And true to their word, his tower was never threatened. Fires would burn right up to the base and then split, going around it, leaving him untouched, while everything else burned. Grandpa said he'd carried the guilt of it for 30 years. All those acres that burned because he didn't call them in fast enough. All the resources wasted fighting fires that could have been stopped earlier. But he'd also seen the results. The areas where he'd let the entity fires burn had regenerated stronger, healthier. The forest was better for what he'd done, even if it meant betraying his oath as a lookout. He died 2 days after telling me this story. At the funeral, several old rangers from the Bitterroot came to pay their respects. One of them, a guy in his 70s who'd worked with Grandpa, pulled me aside. He said Grandpa was the best lookout he'd ever known, had an instinct for fires that was almost supernatural. He'd call in fires at the perfect moment, not too early, not too late, like he knew exactly how long they needed to burn. I just nodded and thanked him. I never told anyone what Grandpa had told me. Who would believe it? But sometimes I think about those lights moving through the forest, doing the work that needs to be done, and I wonder if they're still out there. I wonder if they've found someone else to make a deal with, another lookout, willing to help them maintain the balance. And I wonder what happens if they can't find anyone. What happens when the forest becomes so choked with fuel that no amount of human intervention can prevent the catastrophic fire that's coming? Maybe that's what climate change really is. Not just human activity, but the consequences of breaking ancient agreements we never knew existed. If something beyond human understanding offered you a deal to protect you in exchange for looking the other way, while it did what it needed to do, would you take it? Story 3. I worked as a wilderness ranger in the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness in Idaho for 8 years. It's the largest contiguous wilderness area in the lower 48 states, over 2 million acres of some of the most remote and rugged country in America. We'd get maybe a dozen visitors a year in our sector, and most of them were experienced backcountry types who knew what they were doing. So when a family of 4 went missing on a simple overnight camping trip, it set off alarms. The Pritchards were from Boise, father, mother, and 2 daughters aged 9 and 12. They'd filed a trip plan for a 2-day, 1-night camping trip along the middle fork of the Salmon River, a relatively easy route that saw regular traffic during summer months. When they didn't check out with the ranger station on time, we initiated a search. I was part of the initial response team. We hiked into their planned campsite and found it exactly as you'd expect. Tent set up properly, food secured in bear canisters, campfire ring with cold ashes. Everything looked normal except for one detail that made my stomach drop. Their boots were lined up outside the tent. All 4 pairs arranged neatly side by side, like they'd taken them off before going to bed and just never put them back on. We searched in expanding circles from the campsite. No tracks leading away, no signs of struggle, no indication of which direction they might have gone. It was like they'd simply vanished from inside their tent, leaving everything behind. We brought in dogs, a helicopter with thermal imaging. and expanded the search to cover a 20-mile radius. Nothing. On the third day, I found something that didn't make sense. I was searching a drainage about 2 miles from the Pritchard campsite when I noticed a path I'd never seen before. I'd hiked this area dozens of times over the years, knew every trail and game path, but this was new. It was well-defined, clearly man-made, but not on any map. Against protocol, I followed it. The path wound through dense timber, climbing gradually toward a ridgeline. After about a mile, it opened into a clearing. I definitely would have remembered it if I'd seen it before. The clearing was perfectly circular, about 50 yards across, and in the center was a structure. It looked like a cabin, but wrong. The logs were too uniform, too straight, and they were arranged in a pattern that hurt to look at directly. The corners didn't quite meet right, and the roof seemed to be at an impossible angle, steep on one side and nearly flat on the other. The door was open, just a dark rectangle that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I should have radioed my position and waited for backup. Instead, I approached the cabin. I called out, identifying myself as a ranger, asking if anyone was inside. No response. I stepped through the doorway and immediately felt disoriented. The interior was larger than the exterior should have allowed. The single room seemed to stretch back farther than the building's walls, and the ceiling was higher than the roofline I'd seen from outside. 4 sleeping bags were laid out on the floor, arranged in a row. They were occupied. I could see the shapes of people inside them, completely still. I approached the nearest one and knelt down beside it. "Hello? I'm with search and rescue. Are you injured?" The person inside the sleeping bag didn't respond. I reached out and touched the fabric, and it felt wrong. Too cold, almost frozen, despite the warm summer air. I unzipped the sleeping bag. Inside was Mrs. Pritchard, or something that looked like her. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, but they didn't blink or move. Her chest wasn't rising and falling, she wasn't breathing, but she also didn't look dead. Her skin had color, her body was relaxed, not stiff. She looked like someone who'd paused mid-breath and just stopped. I checked the other sleeping bags. Mr. Pritchard and both daughters, all in the same state. Not dead, not alive, just suspended somehow. I tried to shake Mrs. Pritchard awake, then Mr. Pritchard, but neither responded. I grabbed my radio to call for medical evacuation and realized it wasn't working. No static, no squelch, just dead silence. That's when I heard the footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate steps moving from one end of the cabin to the other. But the ceiling above me didn't creak or shift. The footsteps sounded like they were on a roof, but they had no weight, made no impact. They paced back and forth, and I realized they were pacing in time with my heartbeat. I needed to get out. I grabbed Mrs. Pritchard under the arms and tried to pull her from the sleeping bag. She was impossibly heavy, like she weighed 1,000 pounds. I couldn't budge her. I tried Mr. Pritchard, same thing. The daughters, same result. It was like they were anchored to the floor by some invisible force. The footsteps above me stopped. The cabin went completely silent. Then I heard breathing, deep and slow, coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, the entire structure was breathing, and I was inside it. I ran for the door and found it gone. Where there had been an open doorway, there was now just a wall of logs, solid and seamless. I pounded on it, screaming for help, and the walls started to close in. Not quickly, but steadily, the room getting smaller, the ceiling lowering. I was going to be crushed. I'd end up in a sleeping bag next to the Pritchards, frozen in place, suspended between life and death, while the cabin digested us slowly. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I remember screaming. Remember throwing myself at the walls. Remember feeling the ceiling press down on my shoulders. Then I remember waking up outside the clearing, lying in the dirt with my radio crackling to life in my hand. Search and rescue was calling me, asking for my position. I gave them my coordinates and told them I'd found the Pritchards. I led a team back to the clearing an hour later. The cabin was gone. Just an empty circle of grass, undisturbed, with no indication a structure had ever stood there. We searched the area for the rest of the day and found nothing. The Pritchards were declared missing, presumed dead. The case is still open. I gave my report, leaving out the details about the cabin. Who would believe me? I said I'd found the clearing, but nothing else. That I must have gotten disoriented and passed out from heat exhaustion. But I know what I saw. And I know the Pritchards are still there, somewhere. Not dead, just trapped in a place that exists outside our normal understanding of space. A place that appears on no maps because it's not always there, not always accessible. A place that catches people sometimes when the conditions are right and keeps them. I requested a transfer 6 months later. I work in a visitor center now, answering questions about trail conditions and wildlife safety. Sometimes families come in planning overnight camping trips, and I have to fight the urge to tell them not to go. To stay on the marked trail. To never follow a path they've never seen before, no matter how well maintained it looks. Because there are places in the wilderness that aren't really part of the wilderness. Places that wear the forest like camouflage, that wait patiently for someone to wander in, and that never let them leave. If you found a structure in the wilderness that wasn't on any map and seemed impossible in its construction, would you investigate or turn back immediately? Story 4. I spent 12 years as a backcountry ranger in Olympic National Park before I finally understood why the Park Service has such strict rules about leaving trails. People think it's about environmental protection or preventing people from getting lost. That's part of it, sure, but the real reason, the one they don't put on signs or in brochures, is that there are things in the deep forest that shouldn't be disturbed. Things that have been there longer than the park, longer than the country, maybe longer than humans have walked this continent. In the fall of 2009, I was assigned to investigate reports of strange sounds coming from an area we called the Hoh Rainforest Deep Zone. It's an area about 15 miles from the nearest trailhead. Old-growth forest so dense that even at midday, the canopy blocks out most of the sunlight. We don't maintain trails back there, don't encourage visitors to go there, but every few years, someone wanders in and reports something unusual. This time, it was a solo backpacker who'd gone off trail to find a campsite away from other hikers. He'd set up his tent in a small clearing and was cooking dinner when he heard singing. He said it was a woman's voice, clear and beautiful, singing something that sounded like a lullaby, but in a language he didn't recognize. The voice seemed to be coming from all directions at once, surrounding his camp. He called out, asking if someone needed help, but the singing continued without pause or acknowledgement. As night fell, the singing got louder, more insistent, and he started to feel compelled to follow it, to find the source. He said it took all his willpower to stay in his tent. He packed up at first light and hiked out, reporting the incident at the ranger station. I volunteered to check it out, thinking it was probably just a weird echo effect or maybe another camper playing music. I hiked in alone, which was against protocol, but we were short-staffed and I'd been in that area dozens of times. I found the clearing the backpacker had described easily enough, small, sheltered, with evidence of a recent campfire. I set up my own camp and settled in to wait. Night fell, and for the first few hours, everything was normal. The usual sounds of the forest at night, owls, small animals rustling in the undergrowth, branches creaking in the wind. Then around midnight, I heard it. Singing. The backpacker hadn't been exaggerating. It was a woman's voice, clear and close, singing in a language I'd never heard. The melody was haunting, beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. I grabbed my flashlight and called out, identifying myself as a park ranger, asking whoever was out there to make themselves known. The singing stopped abruptly, and silence. Then it started again, but closer now, maybe 20 yards from my tent. I unzipped my tent and shone my light into the forest. Nothing. Just trees and shadows, and that voice, singing from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. I made a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. I followed the singing. I told myself I was just doing my job, investigating a potential lost hiker or unauthorized camper. But the truth is, I wanted to find the source. The voice was so beautiful, so compelling, that I needed to know who or what was making that sound. Me. I walked into the forest with my flashlight, following the singing deeper into the trees. The voice stayed ahead of me, always just out of sight, leading me farther from camp. I followed it for what felt like hours, completely losing track of time and direction. The trees got taller, older, the trunks so massive my light couldn't illuminate their full circumference. The singing led me to a grove I'd never seen before. The trees here were different, not Sitka spruce or western hemlock, but something else, something I couldn't identify. Their bark was smooth and pale, almost luminescent in my flashlight beam. And hanging from every branch were things that looked like cocoons, hundreds of them, each about the size and shape of a human body. The singing was coming from the cocoons, all of them, singing in harmony, that same haunting melody. I approached the nearest one and saw that it wasn't a cocoon, it was a person, wrapped in something that looked like spider silk, but thicker, stronger. I could see their face through the translucent wrapping, eyes closed, mouth moving, singing. I recognized her. Sarah Mitchell, missing hiker from 1997. I'd seen her picture in the cold case files. She'd been 26 when she disappeared on a solo camping trip. She looked exactly the same now, 12 years later, suspended in that cocoon, singing. I checked the other cocoons. Each one contained a person, all of them preserved perfectly, all of them singing. Some I recognized from recent missing person reports. Others looked older, their clothes dating from decades past. One woman wore a dress from the 1950s, a man in a military uniform that looked like it was from World War II. They were all singing, all perfectly preserved, all trapped in that grove. I tried to cut Sarah free. I pulled out my knife and started sawing at the silk wrapping her. The moment my blade touched it, all the singing stopped. Every single cocoon went silent at once. Then they started screaming. Not the people inside them, the cocoons themselves, shrieking with voices that didn't sound human. The trees started moving. Not swaying in wind, but moving deliberately, branches reaching down, trying to grab me. I ran through the forest in complete darkness. Because I dropped my flashlight, ran without any sense of direction, just trying to get away from that grove and those screaming cocoons. I don't know how I found my way back to my camp. Maybe luck, maybe something guided me out. I threw my gear in my pack and hiked out in the middle of the night, using my backup headlamp, not stopping until I reached the trailhead at dawn. I reported everything. They did a full search of the area, brought in teams, used GPS to map every inch of the whole rainforest deep zone. They found nothing. No grove, no strange trees, no cocoons. Just normal old-growth forest, exactly what you'd expect to see. They put me on medical leave, sent me to counseling, implied I'd had some kind of breakdown from stress and isolation. I went through the motions, said what they wanted to hear, and eventually they cleared me for duty. But I transferred to a different park. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't walk through the hoe knowing what was deeper in, knowing that there's a grove where missing people hang in cocoons, singing for eternity. Sometimes I wonder about Sarah Mitchell. Is she still singing? Does she know she's been there for 12 years? Do any of them know? Or are they dreaming, lost in whatever vision that grove creates for them, singing without knowing why? I'll never know, and I'll never go back to find out. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some missing people aren't meant to be found. The forest keeps its secrets, and it punishes those who try to uncover them. Have you ever heard music or singing in the wilderness that had no visible source? And did you follow it or stay where you were? Story 5. My career with the Forest Service started in 1998 when I was assigned to the Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri. I was young, idealistic, and excited to spend my days protecting wilderness areas and helping the visitors enjoy the outdoors safely. What I wasn't prepared for was learning that some areas aren't meant to be enjoyed, that some parts of the forest exist for purposes we don't understand and shouldn't interfere with. There was a section of the forest we called the Blair Creek watershed, about 8,000 acres of oak hickory forest, surrounding a network of small streams. Beautiful country, popular with hikers and hunters, generally well-traveled. But every few years, someone would disappear there. Not many, maybe one person every 2 or 3 years, but enough that the old-timers in the department noticed a pattern. The disappearances were always the same. Solo hiker or hunter, experienced in the woods, would head into the watershed and never come out. We'd find their vehicle at the trailhead, sometimes find their camps, but never the people themselves. No bodies, no clues, just empty campsites with gear laid out, like the person had stepped away for a minute and never returned. My supervisor, a veteran ranger named Carl, who had worked the Mark Twain for 30 years, gave me one rule about the Blair Creek watershed. If someone goes missing there, we search for 3 days. After that, we close the case and move on. I thought it was callous until I understood the alternative. In my second year, a bow hunter named Derek Simmons went missing in the watershed. He was ex-military, survival instructor, the kind of guy who could live in the woods for a month with just a knife and a fire starter. When his wife reported him overdue, we launched a full search and rescue operation. I was part of the team that found his camp on the second day. Everything was there: tent, bow, gear, food. His truck was at the trailhead with the keys in the ignition. But no Derek. We searched for 3 days as protocol dictated. Then Carl called off the search. Derek's wife begged us to continue, to expand the search area and to bring in more resources. Carl refused. He told her, and I'll never forget this: "We can't find him because he's not lost. He's where he's supposed to be." I was furious. I confronted Carl back at the ranger station, told him we had a duty to continue searching, that giving up after 3 days was unacceptable. Carl looked at me with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen and said, "Come with me. I need to show you something." He drove us to the Blair Creek watershed, to an area off any marked trail. We hiked for about 2 miles through dense forest until we reached a rock formation I'd never seen before. It was a natural amphitheater, a semicircle of limestone bluffs surrounding a flat area maybe 30 yards across. And in that flat area were cairns, hundreds of them. Little stacks of rocks, each about 3 feet tall, arranged in precise rows. Carl said, "Every cairn represents someone who's gone missing in this watershed since we started keeping records. That's 1952. 73 people in 70 years. Hunters, hikers, campers, all of them experienced. All of them vanished without a trace." He pointed to one cairn that looked fresher than the others. "I built that one last week for Derek Simmons." I asked him why. Why build cairns? Why accept this? Why not bring in federal resources, cadaver dogs, whatever it took to find these people? Carl sat down on a rock and told me the story of what happened in 1989 when they tried exactly that. A prominent businessman from St. Louis went missing in the watershed. His family had money and connections, and they pressured the Forest Service to conduct an extensive search. The agency brought in everything: helicopters, dozens of searchers, tracking dogs, thermal imaging. They searched for 2 weeks solid, covering every inch of the watershed. On day 13, they found something. Not the missing man, but a cave entrance that wasn't on any geological survey. The entrance was small, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, hidden behind a waterfall on one of the creeks. Against protocol, 6 rangers entered the cave to search for the missing man. Only one came out: a young ranger named Tom Holloway, who'd been with the service for less than a year. He was found 3 days later, wandering out of the forest, covered in mud and blood, completely catatonic. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, just sat and stared at nothing. They hospitalized him, and after 2 weeks, he finally started talking. He said the cave went deep into the earth, a network of passages that seemed to go on forever. The team had spread out to cover more ground, and Tom had gotten separated from the others. He'd been trying to find his way back when he heard voices, the other rangers, calling his name, telling him to follow them deeper into the cave. He followed the voices for hours, but something about them bothered him. They were too perfect, too clear, echoing in ways that didn't make sense in the confined space. And they never got closer, no matter how far he walked. Finally, he stopped and called out, asking them to come back to him instead. The voices stopped. Complete silence. Then he heard something else. Breathing. Massive, slow breathing that seemed to come from the cave itself, like the passages were lungs expanding and contracting. He turned and ran, using the sound of the creek water to navigate back toward the entrance. He made it out just before the entrance collapsed, tons of rocks sliding down, sealing the cave completely. The other 5 rangers never came out. Their bodies were never recovered. Tom resigned from the Forest Service immediately and moved out of state. Last Carl heard, he was working construction in Arizona and refused to talk about what happened. After that incident, the agency made a decision. The Blair Creek watershed was dangerous in ways they didn't understand and couldn't control. But closing it to the public would draw attention, create conspiracy theories, maybe even encourage people to sneak in. So instead, they adopted the 3-day search protocol. Look for missing people, document the disappearance, build a cairn, and move on. Carl said he'd built 18 cairns himself over his 30 years. He knew every name, every face. He said it was the price of keeping the forest open, of maintaining the illusion that these were just normal disappearances, tragic accidents that could happen anywhere. Because if people knew the truth, that something in the watershed was actively taking people, had been taking people for at least 70 years, the panic would be worse than the disappearances. I didn't want to accept it. I spent the next month researching, looking through old case files, trying to find a pattern or explanation. What I found was worse than unexplained disappearances. I found records of searches that went wrong. A 1976 incident where a search dog went into the watershed and came back without its handler. The dog was found sitting at the trailhead waiting, but the handler was gone. In 1983, a helicopter doing an aerial search reported seeing someone standing in a clearing, waving for help. They landed and the entire crew, pilot, and 3 searchers disappeared. The helicopter was found still running, rotor spinning, completely empty. Every time someone pushed too hard, tried to find answers, went too deep into the watershed, more people disappeared. The forest was defending itself, or something in it was, and the only way to minimize casualties was to accept the losses and move on. I tried one more time to change the policy. I wrote a report recommending we close the watershed, claim environmental concerns, or endangered species protection. The response came from someone high up in the regional office, someone I'd never met. It was short. Your recommendation has been noted and rejected. Follow established protocols. Do not pursue this matter further. I followed protocols. For 8 more years, I worked the Mark Twain National Forest. 3 more people disappeared in the Blair Creek watershed during that time. I built 3 more cairns. Each time I stood in that limestone amphitheater, stacking rocks, and wondered about the person I was memorializing. Did they suffer? Were they still alive somewhere, trapped in that cave system Tom Holloway had found? Or had something else taken them? Something that used the watershed as hunting grounds? I'll never know. I transferred to a different forest in 2010, unable to keep building cairns, unable to look families in the eye and pretend we didn't know their loved ones had been taken by something we couldn't fight or understand. I work in Montana now, in mountains that are harsh and dangerous, but honest about it. Bears, cliffs, avalanches. I can warn people about those. I can teach them to be safe. But how do you warn someone about a place that seems normal, that looks like every other forest, but hides something that's been taking people for generations? You can't. So you follow the protocol. 3 days of searching, 1 cairn. Then you move on and wait for the next disappearance. I still dream about the Blair Creek watershed sometimes. In the dreams, I'm building cairns, but they keep multiplying. I stack 1 set of rocks and turn around to find 10 more piles that need building. I work faster, but they appear faster. Hundreds of cairns, stretching in every direction, representing people who haven't even disappeared yet, but will. And in the distance, I hear breathing. Deep, slow breathing that makes the ground shake. The watershed itself, waiting patiently for its next offering. I wake up from those dreams wondering if Carl is still there, still building cairns, still following protocol. He'd be in his 60s now, probably close to retirement. I wonder who will take over when he's gone. Who will inherit the knowledge of what's really happening in the Blair Creek watershed, and the burden of keeping it quiet. And I wonder how many other places like it exist in America's forests. How many watersheds, valleys, groves, and canyons have their own 3-day search protocols? How many rangers build cairns in secret, memorializing people taken by things we can't name or explain? How many families are told their loved ones simply got lost in the woods, when the truth is so much worse? I don't have answers. I just have memories of 18 cairns, 18 names, 18 faces I'll never forget, and the knowledge that somewhere in Missouri, in a limestone amphitheater surrounded by oak and hickory trees, those cairns are still standing, still marking the places where people crossed from our world into whatever exists in the deep parts of the Blair Creek watershed, still waiting for the next name to be added to the list. If you discovered your favorite hiking area had a pattern of disappearances that authorities were deliberately hiding, would you keep visiting or find somewhere else to explore? It's Story 6. I worked as a backcountry ranger in Glacier National Park for 15 years. And in that time, I learned that the most dangerous thing in the wilderness isn't bears or mountain lions or bad weather. It's the things that look human, but aren't. The things that mimic us well enough to fool us at a distance, but reveal themselves as fundamentally wrong when you get close. We had a name for them among the rangers, though we'd never use it in official reports or around visitors. We called them the walkers because that's all they did, walk. They'd appear on remote trails, moving with a steady, purposeless gait. And if you encountered one, the best thing you could do was get off the trail and let it pass. Don't interact, don't make eye contact, don't try to help. Just let it walk by and continue on its way. I saw my first walker in my third year. I was doing a routine patrol on the Highline Trail when I spotted someone ahead of me, moving slowly up the path. Nothing unusual about that. The Highline is popular, and I'd passed dozens of hikers that morning. But something about this one bothered me. Their gait was too regular, too mechanical. They didn't pause to look at the scenery or catch their breath. They just walked with that same steady rhythm, never varying pace. I called out a greeting as I got closer. No response. I called again, louder. Still nothing. The person just kept walking. I jogged to catch up, thinking maybe they had headphones in and couldn't hear me. When I got within 10 feet, I saw what was wrong. Their head was on backwards, not turned to look behind them. Completely backwards, face pointing the wrong direction while their body walked forward. The face was expressionless, eyes open but not focusing on anything. And the mouth was moving, opening and closing in a regular pattern, but no sound came out. I stopped dead in my tracks. The walker continued up the trail, head facing backward, mouth working silently, feet carrying it forward with that mechanical precision. I watched it round a bend and disappear, then I radioed the ranger station. I just encountered a walker on the Highline, I said, using our unofficial code. Heading north, approximate mile marker 7. The response was immediate. Copy that. Mark the location and return to station. Do not follow. Do not engage. Back at the station, my supervisor, a grizzled ranger named Helen, who'd worked Glacier for 25 years, sat me down and explained what I'd seen. She said the walkers had been appearing in the park for as long as anyone could remember. They always looked human at first glance, wore normal hiking clothes, carried packs or day bags. But they were wrong in ways that became obvious if you looked too closely. Helen said some walked with their heads backwards like I'd seen. Others had joints that bent the wrong way or moved their limbs in sequences that didn't match human locomotion. Some had faces that were almost right, but not quite. Eyes too far apart, mouths too wide, features that looked like someone had described a human face, but never actually seen one. No one knew what they were or where they came from. They'd appear on trails, walk for miles or sometimes days, then disappear. They never acknowledged other hikers, never responded to attempts at communication, never deviated from their paths. And here's the truly disturbing part. They were always different people. Different faces, different builds, different clothes. But all of them had that same mechanical walk, that same empty expression. Helen's theory was that they were people who'd gotten lost in the park years or decades ago and had been changed by something in the wilderness. Changed into these hollow things that walked endlessly through the mountains, caught in some kind of loop they couldn't escape. She'd been tracking reports of walkers for 20 years and had noticed that many of them wore clothes that matched styles from specific eras. A walker spotted in 1995 might be wearing a style from the 1970s. One seen in 2005 might have clothes from the 1950s. She showed me a file she'd been maintaining unofficially. Dozens of walker sightings over the years, all documented, all compared against missing persons reports from the park. The correlations were disturbing. A man went missing in 1983 wearing a red windbreaker. In 1995, a walker was spotted wearing an identical red windbreaker. A woman vanished in 1967 while wearing distinctive yellow rain gear. That same yellow rain gear appeared on a walker in 1989, then again in 2003. Helen believed something in Glacier was taking people and turning them into walkers, not killing them, but transforming them into these mockeries of human life, sending them walking through the park forever. She didn't know why or how, just that it had been happening for a very long time. I asked why we didn't warn people, didn't close trails where walkers were frequently spotted. Helen said they'd tried that in the 1970s. They closed a section of the park, claiming environmental concerns, and it worked for a while. Walker sightings in that area dropped to zero, but sightings in other parts of the park tripled. Whatever created the walkers had simply moved its activity to new locations. So the unofficial policy became, don't interfere with walkers, document sightings, and hope they eventually walk themselves into such remote areas that visitors would never encounter them. It was a bad policy, Helen admitted, but it was the only one that didn't make things worse. Over the next 12 years, I saw 17 more walkers. Each one was unique, each one wrong in different ways. A man whose legs were on backwards, but who walked forward anyway, knees bending in impossible directions. A woman whose face was completely smooth except for a mouth that opened too wide. A child, that was the worst one, who walked on all fours but with their spine arched so their face pointed up at the sky. I documented each sighting, added them to Helen's unofficial file, and tried not to think about the fact that each walker had once been a person. Someone who'd come to Glacier to enjoy the mountains, who'd gotten lost or injured or separated from their group, and who'd been found by something that transformed them into an endless walker. The case that haunts me most happened in my 14th year. A young couple, Mark and Jennifer Chen, were doing a multi-day backpacking trip on the Continental Divide Trail. They checked in with us at their planned campsites for 3 nights, then went silent. When they didn't check out on time, we launched a search. We found Jennifer on the 4th day. She was walking the trail, moving with that characteristic mechanical gait, wearing the same clothes she'd been wearing when she started her trip. But her eyes were empty, her face expressionless, and when we called her name, she didn't react. She just kept walking. We tried to stop her, to bring her in for medical evaluation. The moment we touched her, she started screaming. Not words, just this high-pitched wail that went on and on without her needing to breathe. We let go and she stopped screaming, returned to her mechanical walk, continued up the trail. We followed her for 6 hours, calling her name, trying to get through to her, hoping some part of Jennifer was still in there. She never acknowledged us. She just walked and walked and walked. Finally, as night fell, she walked off the trail into dense forest. We tried to follow, but she moved through the underbrush without slowing, without difficulty, passing through spaces too small for a human body to fit. We lost her in the darkness. We never found Mark. But 2 weeks later, another ranger reported seeing a walker on a different trail, 40 miles from where Jennifer had disappeared. Male, matching Mark's description, wearing Mark's clothes, walking with his arms stretched straight out from his sides like a scarecrow, fingers bent at unnatural angles. That was when I started seriously considering quitting. The idea that Jennifer and Mark had both been transformed, that whatever took them had split them up and sent them walking in different directions, possibly never to cross paths again, it was too much. They'd come to the park together, probably in love, planning a romantic backpacking trip. Now they were both walkers, both trapped in that mechanical existence, both lost to whatever they'd once been. I lasted 1 more year. In that year, I saw 3 more walkers, all of them people I recognized from recent missing persons reports. A solo hiker who'd vanished 2 months prior. A father who'd gotten separated from his family during a day hike. A trail runner who'd gone out for a morning jog and never returned. Each time I saw one, I'd try to imagine what had happened to them. What had they encountered in the woods? What had transformed them from living, thinking people into these empty vessels that walked endlessly through the mountains? Was there any part of their original consciousness still inside, trapped and screaming while their body marched on without their control? I'll never know. And that uncertainty, combined with the knowledge that it could happen to anyone at any time in any part of the park, finally drove me to resign. I work in a library now in the city, surrounded by people and buildings and streetlights. I hike occasionally, but only on popular trails during peak hours, always with a group, always with multiple ways to call for help. Because I know what's out there in the remote places. I know that something in the wilderness is collecting people, transforming them, sending them walking forever through the mountains. And I know that the Park Service knows about it, but can't stop it, can't even acknowledge it, can only document it and hope that not too many visitors encounter the walkers. Helen retired a few years after I left. I called her once, asked if she was still maintaining the walker file. She said she'd passed it on to another ranger, someone she trusted to continue the documentation. She said the sightings were increasing, twice as many in the past 5 years as in the previous 20. Whatever created the walkers was getting more active. I asked her if she thought anyone would ever figure out what they were or how to stop them. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "I don't think we're supposed to stop them. I think they're a natural part of the wilderness, like bears or wolves. We're the intruders in their territory. They were here first, and they'll be here after we're gone. The best we can do is avoid becoming one of them." That's what I think about when I see missing persons reports from national parks. When families plead for extended searches when they refuse to accept that their loved ones are gone. I think about the walkers and wonder if maybe those people aren't dead at all. Maybe they're still out there, walking endlessly through the wilderness, transformed into something that looks human from a distance, but reveals itself as fundamentally other when you get close. Maybe someday, decades from now, a hiker will encounter a walker wearing familiar clothes, carrying a familiar pack, with a familiar face frozen in that expressionless mask. And they won't know they're looking at someone who vanished years ago, someone who's been walking through the mountains ever since, trapped in a body that won't stop moving. That's the real horror of the walkers. Not that they're monsters, but that they used to be us. That any one of us could become one. Could step off a trail at the wrong moment and encounter whatever it is that transforms people into endless walkers. That we could spend the rest of existence marching through the wilderness, empty and mechanical, while our loved ones search for us, not knowing we're still out there, still moving, still lost. If you encountered someone on a remote trail who looked human but moved in ways that seemed fundamentally wrong, would you approach them to offer help or keep your distance? Story 7. I worked for the Bureau of Land Management in Nevada for 9 years, managing a vast stretch of desert that most people had never heard of and would never visit. It was stark, beautiful country, endless expanses of sagebrush and sand, broken up by dramatic rock formations and ancient dry lake beds. We'd get maybe a dozen visitors a month, mostly rockhounds and off-road enthusiasts who knew how to handle the extreme conditions. What made our sector unusual was the number of mine shafts. Nevada is honeycombed with old mines from the silver and gold rush days, many of them completely uncharted, most of them extremely dangerous. My primary job was identifying and securing these shafts, putting up fencing, posting warning signs, sometimes filling in the smaller ones with concrete. The work was lonely but satisfying. I'd spend days in the backcountry, GPS unit in hand, mapping old mines and making them safe. I found dozens over the years, ranging from shallow prospect holes to elaborate tunnel systems that went hundreds of feet into the earth. Each one represented someone's dream of striking it rich, abandoned when the ore played out or the money ran dry. In my 7th year, I found a mine that wasn't on any historical record. It was in a remote canyon, hidden behind a rock fall that looked natural but revealed itself as deliberately placed when I examined it closely. Someone had stacked boulders to conceal the entrance, then scattered smaller rocks to make it look like a natural collapse. If I hadn't been specifically looking for mine entrances, I would have walked right past it. I cleared the entrance enough to see inside. The tunnel was tall and wide, professionally excavated. with timber supports that were old but still solid. Someone had invested serious money in this operation. I marked the location on my GPS, took photos, and planned to return with equipment to properly secure it. That night, back at my trailer, I researched the area's mining history. Nothing. No claims filed, no reports of mining activity, no mention of any commercial operation in that canyon. It was like the mine didn't exist in any official record, despite clearly being a major excavation. I returned 3 days later with fencing materials and concrete. The rockfall had been moved aside, the entrance standing wide open. Deliberate. Someone had been there since my visit and wanted the mine accessible. I called out, thinking maybe a rockhound or historian had discovered it and was exploring. No answer. Just my voice echoing down the tunnel, fading into darkness. I should have left and called for law enforcement backup. BLM rangers don't have the authority to confront trespassers, and for all I knew, someone could be running illegal operations in that mine. But I'd been working alone in the desert for years, had developed maybe too much confidence in my ability to handle situations. So I grabbed my flashlight and entered the mine. The main tunnel ran straight for about 50 yards, then branched into multiple passages. The floor was covered in footprints, recent ones, dozens of them, all heading deeper into the mine. They were barefoot prints, which struck me as insane. Mine floors are littered with sharp rocks, rusty metal, and broken glass. Nobody in their right mind would walk through one barefoot. I followed the prints down the main passage, calling out periodically, getting no response. The tunnel split repeatedly, creating a maze of passages heading in all directions. I marked my route with chalk, making sure I could find my way back. The barefoot prints continued on every passage, sometimes overlapping, like many people had walked this route many times. After maybe a quarter mile, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. My flashlight barely reached the far walls. It was huge, maybe 100 feet across, and it was full of people. They sat in rows on the rock floor, maybe 40 or 50 of them, all facing the same direction. All of them completely naked, all of them absolutely silent. I froze in the entrance. My first thought was that I'd stumbled on some kind of cult gathering, maybe a religious group using the mine for ceremonies. But something was wrong. Nobody moved. Nobody acknowledged my presence. They just sat there in perfect rows, facing the back wall of the chamber, not speaking, barely breathing. I called out, louder this time. BLM Ranger, you're trespassing on federal land. I need you all to exit the mine immediately. Not one person moved. Not a twitch, not a turn of the head. It was like they were statues frozen in place. I approached the nearest person, a woman, middle-aged, with matted hair and skin covered in dust. I touched her shoulder. She was ice cold despite the mine being warm from geothermal heat. I shook her gently. No response. I checked her pulse. Nothing. She was dead. They were all dead. 40-some people sitting in neat rows, all facing the same direction, all dead. Some looked like they'd been there for days, others for weeks, judging by decomposition. But they were all positioned identically, all sitting cross-legged with their hands up on their knees, all facing the back wall. I ran back through those tunnels, following my chalk marks, not caring about procedure or protocol or anything except getting out of that mine. I called it in the moment I had cell signal, gasping into the phone about dozens of bodies in an unmarked mine, possible mass suicide or murder. They sent everyone. County sheriff, state police, FBI, even CDC because of concerns about biological hazards. They documented the scene, removed the bodies, conducted a massive investigation. What they found was worse than I'd imagined. The bodies ranged in decomposition from hours old to years old. DNA testing identified some of them as people who'd gone missing in Nevada and neighboring states over the past decade. Hikers, campers, drifters, people who'd vanished without a trace. Forensics couldn't determine cause of death. No injuries, no signs of poisoning or disease, no explanation for why their hearts had simply stopped. But here's what made the investigators' blood run cold. While they were processing the scene, 3 more people walked into the mine. a husband and wife from Colorado who'd been camping nearby, and a solo hiker from California. They walked past the police perimeter, ignored shouted commands to stop, entered the mine, walked to the chamber, removed their clothes, sat down in the next empty spots in the rows, and died. Just like that. Sat down and stopped breathing, within minutes of entering the chamber. The mine was sealed immediately. They pumped it full of concrete, destroying the entire tunnel system, burying whatever was in that chamber under tons of hardened cement. The official story was an abandoned mine with hazardous air quality. Tragic accident, all bodies recovered. But the unofficial truth was worse. The FBI's theory, never made public, was that something in that chamber was calling people, broadcasting some kind of signal that certain people could hear, drawing them from hundreds of miles away, making them walk into the desert, find the mine, enter the chamber, and join the rows. Sit down and wait to die. They based this on evidence found in the victims' vehicles and campsites. Many had journals or phones with entries showing they'd changed their plans suddenly, felt compelled to visit this specific area, described hearing something calling at them. One woman's final text to her sister said, "I can hear them singing. I need to go sing with them. Don't worry, I'll be home soon." She never sent another message. I testified at the closed hearing, described everything I'd seen. They asked if I'd felt any compulsion to join the rows, if I'd heard anything unusual in the mine. I said no, but that was a lie. I had heard something right before I ran, a humming, low and rhythmic, that seemed to come from the rock itself. And for just a second, I'd felt the urge to sit down with the others, to join the rows, to wait. I quit the BLM 2 weeks after the mine was sealed. Moved to Oregon, got a job with a timber company, a work that keeps me in forests instead of deserts. But I still dream about that chamber. I still see those rows of people, all facing the same direction, all waiting for something. And I wonder what they were looking at. Because the back wall of the chamber, the wall they were all facing, wasn't natural rock. It was smooth, too smooth, like polished stone. And carved into it, barely visible in my flashlight beam, were symbols. Thousands of them, covering every inch of the wall, carved with precision that must have taken years or decades. They weren't any language I recognized, weren't any human writing system I'd ever seen. The FBI photographed them, sent them to linguists and archaeologists and cryptographers. Nobody could identify them. But one archaeologist noted that the style was similar to petroglyphs found in other parts of Nevada, rock carvings left by indigenous peoples thousands of years ago. Except those petroglyphs were simple, stick figures, basic shapes. These were complex, mathematical, deliberate. His theory, dismissed by most of his colleagues, was that the symbols were old, older than Native American settlement, older than human presence in North America. Something had carved those symbols long before humans walked the continent, and whatever carved them had left something behind in that chamber, something that called to certain people, drew them in, made them sit and stare at those symbols until their hearts stopped. I don't know if that's true, but I know that mine is still calling people. The FBI monitors missing persons reports in the region, watching for patterns. They've found 3 more cases in the past 2 years, people who vanished near that canyon, whose journals or messages suggested they were being called somewhere. The mine is sealed, inaccessible, but something in there still broadcasting, still reaching out, still looking for people to join its congregation. I think about those symbols sometimes. Wonder what message they contained. Were they an invitation? A warning? Instructions for something we're not meant to understand? I'll never know. But I know this. There are places on Earth that don't belong to us, that never did, that were claimed by something else long before we arrived. And sometimes those places call out to us. They invite us in, and if we accept that invitation, we join the others who came before, sitting in the dark, facing symbols we can't read, waiting for something that will never come. If you felt an overwhelming compulsion to visit a specific location for reasons you couldn't explain, would you trust that feeling or fight against it? Oh, Story 8. I spent 6 years working as a ranger in the Chattahoochee National Forest in North Georgia, maintaining trails and managing campsites in some of the most beautiful hardwood forests in the Southeast. It was good work, peaceful work, the kind of job that lets you believe the world is fundamentally benign if you just treat it with respect. Then I met the children of Ravens Gap, and I learned that some things in the wilderness are older and stranger than our ideas of nature can accommodate. Ravens Gap was a hollow in the most remote section of my district, accessible only by a poorly maintained trail that saw maybe a dozen hikers a year. It got its name from the ravens that roosted there in massive numbers, hundreds of them, filling the trees, their calls echoing off the steep valley walls. Beautiful in a haunting way, but most hikers found it unsettling and didn't linger. My first experience with the children happened in my 4th year. I was doing a routine trail inspection in late October when I heard laughter ahead of me. Kids' laughter, high and bright, completely out of place in that isolated area. I rounded a bend and saw them. 5 children, ranging from maybe 6 to 12 years old, playing in the middle of the trail. They wore old-fashioned clothes, the kind you'd see in photographs from the early 1900s. The girls had long dresses and pinafores. The boys wore short pants and suspenders. Their clothes were dirty and worn, but intact, not torn or deteriorated like you'd expect from kids playing rough in the woods. They were playing a game I didn't recognize, holding hands in a circle, singing a song in rhythm, while one child in the middle tried to break through. I called out to them, asking where their parents were, how they'd gotten so far down the trail. They stopped playing and looked at me with identical expressions. Not fear or surprise, but curiosity, like they'd never seen an adult before. Then the oldest girl, maybe 12, spoke. "Are you lost, mister? This is our gap. We've been here forever." I tried to explain that this was national forest land, that they shouldn't be out here without supervision, that I needed to contact their parents. The children looked at each other and giggled, like I'd said something ridiculous. "We don't have parents anymore," the girl said. "The gap takes care of us now. It always has. Since the sickness." She said it so matter-of-factly, with no sadness or fear, that it took me a moment to process. These kids were claiming to be orphans living wild in the forest. I radioed for assistance, described the situation, gave my location. While I waited for backup, I tried to talk to the children to understand their situation. They were happy to talk, friendly even, but their answers didn't make sense. When I asked how long they'd been in the gap, they said, "Forever," or "since the beginning." When I asked what they ate, they pointed to the ravens and said, "They bring us food." When I asked if they were cold at night, they said, "The gap keeps us warm." Backup arrived an hour later. 2 other rangers and a county social worker. The children were still there, still playing their games, completely unconcerned about the adults surrounding them. We tried to coax them into coming with us, explaining that we'd find them homes, families to take care of them. They refused, said they had everything they needed in the gap. When we tried to insist, physically tried to lead them toward the trail, they ran. Not frantically, but playfully, like it was a new game. They ran into the forest, off the trail, moving through the underbrush with impossible ease. We followed, but they were too fast, too familiar with the terrain. Within minutes, we'd lost them completely. We searched for 3 days. Brought in tracking dogs, search and rescue teams, combed every inch of Ravens Gap. Found nothing, no children, no camps, no signs of anyone living in the area. It was like they'd vanished. I reported everything to my supervisor, described the children in detail, their clothes, their words. She listened without expression, then pulled out a file from her locked drawer. "You're not the first," she said. "Rangers have been reporting these children for almost 100 years. She showed me the file. Reports dating back to 1923, all describing encounters with children in Ravens Gap. The descriptions were consistent. 5 kids, old-fashioned clothes, unnaturally comfortable in the wilderness, claiming to have always lived there. Different rangers, different decades, but the same children. The supervisor told me the story passed down among rangers who'd worked the area. In 1918, a flu outbreak hit the small communities in these mountains hard. One family living in Ravens Gap lost both parents to the sickness, leaving 5 children orphaned. Neighbors tried to reach them, to bring the kids to safety, but by the time they arrived, The children had vanished. Some people said they died and were buried in unmarked graves somewhere in the hollow. Others claimed mountain lions or bears had gotten them. But over the years, people kept seeing them. The same 5 children, always the same ages, always in Raven's Gap, always playing their games and singing their songs. The official policy was to document sightings, but not to engage. Don't try to rescue them. Don't try to bring them in. They'd been dead for 100 years, if the story was true. What we were seeing was something else. Something that wore the shape of those children, but wasn't them anymore. I couldn't accept that. Kids needed help, needed protection, regardless of how long they'd been in the woods or what they claimed about their situation. I went back to Raven's Gap alone, against orders, determined to find those children and get them to safety. I hiked in at dawn, calling out for them as soon as I entered the hollow. The ravens were there in force, hundreds of them lining the branches, watching me with those intelligent black eyes. I felt their attention like a physical weight. Every bird focused on me as I moved through their territory. I found the children at midday, in the exact same spot where I'd first seen them. They were playing the same game, singing the same song. When they saw me, they stopped and smiled. "You came back," the oldest girl said. "Nobody ever comes back." I tried a different approach this time. Sat down with them, asked about their lives, their games, what they did all day. They talked freely, describing a routine that sounded almost normal. They woke with the sun, played games, sang songs, explored the gap. The ravens brought them food, berries, nuts, sometimes small animals already prepared and cleaned. At night, they slept in the warm place, which they said was somewhere the gap had made for them. I asked to see the warm place. They looked at each other, uncertain for the first time. "You're not supposed to see it," one of the boys said. "Only children can go there. Adults can't fit." But they agreed to show me where it was. They led me deeper into the gap, to a section I'd never seen despite hiking the area dozens of times. The trees here were different, older, bigger, their bark covered in strange patterns that might have been natural or might have been deliberately carved. And in the center of a ring of these ancient trees was a hole in the ground. Not a cave or a sinkhole, but a hole that looked too perfect, too circular. The edges were smooth, the darkness inside absolute. And from that hole came warmth, a gentle heat that radiated upward, making the air shimmer. "That's where we sleep," the girl said. "Down there. It's warm and safe, and the gap takes care of us." She smiled at me. "Do you want to see? You could come down with us. The gap might let you stay if you ask nicely." Every instinct I had screamed at me to get away from that hole. But I was committed now, determined to understand what was happening to these children. I knelt at the edge and shone my flashlight down. The hole went deep, maybe 50 feet or more, and at the bottom I could see something moving. Something large, covered in what looked like feathers, but wrong. Too big to be any bird I knew. The thing at the bottom of the hole noticed my light. It looked up, and I saw eyes, dozens of them, scattered across what might have been a face, or might have been something else entirely. The eyes blinked in sequence, a wave of motion that made my stomach turn. One of the children tugged my sleeve. "The gap wants to say hello," she said cheerfully. "It doesn't get many visitors, just us. It's been taking care of us since our parents got sick. It keeps us safe and warm, and we never have to grow up or leave. We'll be here forever." I stood up and backed away from the hole. The children watched me with those curious expressions, not hostile, but not quite human either. Something about their eyes reminded me of the ravens, too intelligent, too aware, watching me like they were waiting to see what I'd do. I told them I needed to go, that I'd come back another time. They nodded, accepted this easily. "You can visit whenever you want," the girl said, "but if you try to take us away, the gap won't let you. It needs us here. We're part of it now." I hiked out in a daze, my mind trying to process what I'd seen. When I reported to my supervisor, I told her everything. The hole, the thing at the bottom, what the children had said. She listened, then closed the file and locked it in her drawer again. "Every ranger who encounters them goes through this," she said. "The denial, the determination to save them, the discovery of what's really down there, and then the acceptance that there's nothing we can do. Those children aren't being held against their will. They're not suffering. They've been absorbed by something that lives in that gap, something old and incomprehensible that keeps them in a kind of stasis. They'll never grow, never age, never leave. And trying to force them out only makes things worse. She told me about a ranger in the 1970s who'd tried to rescue the children by force. He'd brought a team, ropes, climbing gear, planning to go down the hole and confront whatever was keeping them. His team descended into the hole and never came back up. The ropes were found cut, not with a blade, but with something that had melted through them. The children remained undisturbed, still playing their games. After that, the policy became absolute. Observe but don't interfere. Document sightings, note any changes, but never try to rescue the children. They weren't prisoners. They were something else now. Part of whatever lived in the gap. Sustained by it, protected by it. Trapped in an eternal childhood that they seemed to genuinely enjoy. I transferred out of the Chattahoochees 6 months later. I couldn't handle knowing those children were out there. Couldn't stand the idea of hiking past Ravens Gap and hearing them laugh and play while something with too many eyes watched from below. I work in a city park now, mowing grass and picking up litter. It's boring, but boring is exactly what I need. Sometimes I wonder if those children are still there and still playing their games, still being fed by ravens and kept warm by the gap. I wonder if they even remember having parents, having a life before the sickness took their family, or if they've been children for so long that they've forgotten what it means to be anything else. And I wonder what that thing at the bottom of the hole really is. Is it feeding on them somehow? Drawing sustenance from their youth? Is it protecting them out of some alien sense of compassion? Or is it doing something else entirely, using them for a purpose we can't understand? I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some children aren't meant to be rescued. Some things in the wilderness are older than we can imagine, and they operate by rules we'll never understand. The children of Ravens Gap have been there for over 100 years. They'll probably be there for 100 more, playing their eternal games, singing their endless songs, kept safe and warm by something that lives beneath the earth. And every few years, a new ranger will encounter them. We'll try to save them, and we'll learn the same hard lesson I did. Some rescues can't be made. Some children are already lost, in ways that have nothing to do with being far from home. If you encountered children in the wilderness who seemed happy but were clearly being influenced by something inhuman, would you try to save them or leave them in peace? Story 9. My time with the Fish and Wildlife Service took me to some of the most remote corners of Alaska. I spent 3 years stationed in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, monitoring caribou populations and documenting ecosystem changes. It was brutal, beautiful work. Months of isolation, extreme cold, and landscapes that hadn't changed in thousands of years. In my second year, I was assigned to investigate unusual predation patterns in a caribou herd that migrated through the northern section of the refuge. The reports from indigenous hunters were troubling. They'd found caribou carcasses scattered across a wide area, killed but not eaten, just left to rot, dozens of them, with injuries that didn't match any known predator. I flew in by bush plane and set up a base camp about 20 miles from the nearest village. The plan was simple: track the caribou herd, document any kills, collect evidence of what was hunting them. I expected to find evidence of a rogue grizzly or maybe wolves, though the pattern was strange for either. What I found was worse than any natural predator. The kills were surgical. Each caribou had been bled completely dry through a single puncture wound at the base of the skull. No feeding, no territorial marking, no behavior that matched any predator I'd studied. Just efficient killing and exsanguination. I followed the trail of bodies for 3 days, documenting each kill, collecting samples. The pattern led northeast, toward an area the local Gitchin people called the place where nothing lives. It was marked on their traditional maps as taboo, a section of the refuge where even caribou wouldn't graze, where birds didn't fly, where the land itself seemed hostile to life. I approached the boundary of this dead zone at dusk on the third day. The change was immediate and obvious. On one side of an invisible line, the tundra was alive. Lichens, mosses, small shrubs struggling through the permafrost. On the other side, nothing. Just bare rock and dirt, sterile and lifeless. I set up camp on the living side of the boundary and spent the night watching the dead zone through binoculars. As darkness fell and I saw movement in the lifeless area. Shapes moving against the bare rock, too far away to identify clearly, but definitely there. They moved in organized patterns, almost like they were patrolling. At dawn, I crossed the boundary. The moment I did, I felt it, a pressure in my head, a low-frequency vibration that I felt more than heard. My GPS stopped working. My satellite phone lost signal. Even my compass spun uselessly, unable to find magnetic north. I continued anyway, documenting everything. The ground was wrong. Not just barren, but actively hostile to life. When I knelt to collect a soil sample, my glove stuck to the rock. When I pulled it free, the leather had degraded, crumbling like it had been exposed to acid. The rock itself had etched the material. A mile into the dead zone, I found the source of the vibration. A structure, not natural, not made by humans or any animal I knew. It was maybe 20 feet tall, composed of interlocking pieces that looked like bones but weren't. They fit together in ways that violated geometry, creating angles that hurt to look at directly. The whole thing pulsed with that low vibration, the air around it shimmering like heat waves. And surrounding the structure were things, the shapes I'd seen moving the night before. They stood motionless now, facing outward, in a circle around the structure. When I got closer, I saw they were made of the same, not quite bone material as the structure, assembled into forms that suggested human bodies but weren't. Too tall, too thin, with joints in the wrong places. They didn't react to my presence. I walked between them, studying their construction, trying to understand what I was seeing. They were hollow, I realized. Empty frameworks shaped like bodies but containing nothing. Waiting. The structure at the center had an opening, a doorway maybe, though calling it that seemed wrong. It was an absence more than an entrance, a space where the structure wasn't. And through that absence, I could see inside. Machinery, or something like machinery. Components moving in rhythms that didn't match any mechanical motion I understood. Organic curves combined with geometric precision, creating something that was neither natural nor artificial, but some third category we don't have words for. I took photos, dozens of them, documenting every angle. My camera worked despite all my other electronics failing, capturing images I'd study later in disbelief. I was so focused on documentation that I didn't notice the hollow bodies moving until they'd surrounded me. They hadn't walked or shifted position. They'd simply been in one configuration and then were in another, forming a circle around me with no transition I could perceive. And they were no longer empty. Each hollow framework now contained something, a mass of writhing tissue that filled the space where organs should be. The tissue moved, reshaped itself, and suddenly the hollow bodies had faces. My face. All of them, every single one, now had copies of my face looking out from those not quite bone skulls. They spoke in unison, using my voice. You shouldn't be here. This place is not for the living. We maintain the boundary. We keep the dead land separate from the living land. You are interfering. I ran. Dropped my equipment, dropped my samples, dropped everything except the camera around my neck, and ran for the boundary. The hollow bodies didn't chase me. They just watched with my face, speaking with my voice. You can't document us. You can't explain us. You can't make us make sense. We are the maintenance. We are the boundary keepers. We have always been here. I crossed the boundary at full sprint and didn't stop until I reached my base camp. I packed up immediately, radioed for emergency extraction, told the pilot I needed to leave right now. He asked if I was in danger. I said yes, though from what I couldn't explain. Back at the main research station, I developed my photographs. Every single one showed normal tundra. No structure, no hollow bodies, no dead zone. Just ordinary Arctic landscape, as if what I'd seen didn't exist on film. I filed my report anyway, describing everything in detail. The response from my superiors was predictable. concern about my mental health, suggestions of isolation-induced psychosis, mandatory psychological evaluation before I'd be cleared for remote fieldwork again. But I also sent copies to the Gitchen elders through a biologist friend who worked with the local communities. They weren't surprised. One elder wrote back, explaining that the dead zone had always been there, long before Europeans arrived, long before their own people came to the area. It was a place where the boundary between life and death was maintained, where something neither living nor dead kept the two realms separate. The elder said every few generations, someone would venture into the dead zone and encounter the boundary keepers. Some came back changed, seeing the world differently. Some came back broken, unable to reconcile what they'd seen with what they believed possible. Some didn't come back at all. He advised me to leave Alaska to go somewhere warm and full of life, somewhere far from places where the boundaries were thin. He said I'd been marked by the boundary keepers, that I'd seen their faces, and they'd seen mine. That connection would follow me, would make me sensitive to other thin places, other boundaries, where the normal rules don't apply. He was right. I left the Fish and Wildlife Service, moved to Florida, got a job with the county parks department. But I can feel them now, the thin places. Spots in the parks where the air feels wrong, where GPS signals fade, where the quality of light changes inexplicably. I avoid those areas, mark them on my personal maps, make sure maintenance crews don't work there alone. Because I understand now what the boundary keepers were trying to tell me. There are places on Earth where life and death aren't distinct states, but overlapping conditions. Where something has to actively maintain the separation, has to patrol the boundary, and keep the two realms from bleeding into each other. The boundary keepers are doing necessary work that's been happening since before humans existed and will continue long after we're gone. And sometimes people like me stumble into their territory. We see them working, see the machinery or biology or whatever it is that maintains the boundaries. And we're faced with a choice: accept that reality is stranger and more complex than we imagine, or break trying to force what we've seen into categories that can't contain it. I chose acceptance. It was that or madness. I live with the knowledge that there are places where death is actively kept separate from life, by entities we don't understand, using methods that violate our understanding of how the universe works. And I'm grateful for them, for the boundary keepers and their endless maintenance. Because if they ever stopped working, if the boundaries ever failed, the deadland would spread. It would consume the living land, turning everything to that sterile rock that dissolves leather and repels all life. The boundary keepers prevent that. They've been preventing it for a very long time. And in exchange, all they ask is that we stay out of the dead zones. Don't cross the boundaries. Don't interfere with their work. It seems like a small price to pay for keeping life and death properly separated. If you discovered a place where the fundamental laws of nature seem to work differently, would you document it for science or leave it alone out of respect for forces beyond our understanding? Story 10. I worked as a ranger in Big Bend National Park for 11 years before retiring last year. Big Bend is massive, 800,000 acres of Chihuahuan desert and mountain ranges along the Texas-Mexico border. It's one of the least visited national parks despite its size, which means vast stretches of backcountry that go weeks or months without seeing a human visitor. In my 9th year, I was assigned to investigate reports of lights in the Chisos Mountains. Visitors had been reporting strange illuminations moving through the peaks at night, sometimes stationary, sometimes moving in patterns that didn't match aircraft or vehicles. The Park Service wanted to rule out illegal activity. Drug smuggling was always a concern in border areas. I hiked into the Chisos with night vision equipment and tracking gear, planning to identify the light source and document whether it posed any threat. I reached a good vantage point just before sunset and set up to observe. As darkness fell, the lights appeared exactly as reported. Brilliant points of illumination moving through the mountains, sometimes solo, sometimes in groups. Through my night vision scope, I could see they weren't campfires or flashlights. They were orbs of light, maybe 3 feet in diameter, floating through the air with no visible means of support. They moved with purpose, following the ridgelines, sometimes descending into valleys, occasionally clustering together before dispersing again. I documented their movements for 3 hours, trying to find a pattern or purpose. Around midnight, one of the orbs changed course. It had been moving along a distant ridge when it suddenly turned and headed directly toward my position. I watched it approach, moving faster than any person could travel through that terrain, weaving between rock formations with impossible precision. The orb stopped about 50 yards from me, hovering at eye level. Now that it was close, I could see it wasn't just light. It was contained in something, a membrane or surface that held the illumination. And inside the light, there were shapes, suggestions of forms, almost like bodies but not solid, shifting and reconfiguring constantly. I stood up, identifying myself as a park ranger, asking if anyone was there who needed assistance. The orb pulsed brighter in response. Then it did something I'll never forget. It showed me images, not projected on a screen, but directly into my mind, bypassing my eyes entirely. I saw the mountains as they'd been millions of years ago when they were forming, when tectonic forces were pushing them skyward. I saw the desert when it was an ocean, when ancient seas covered what's now dry land. I saw creatures that had never been documented by paleontology, species that lived and died and left no fossil record. And I saw the lights, the orbs, present in every era, witnessing every change, recording everything. The vision ended abruptly. The orb dimmed slightly, and I heard something. Not with my ears, but the same way I'd seen the images, directly into my consciousness. We are the observers. We record. We have always recorded. We will always record. You are part of what we observe. Do not interfere. More orbs appeared, surrounding me in a loose circle. They all pulsed in synchronization, and more images came. I saw myself from their perspective, a tiny figure in the vastness of the mountains, insignificant in the scope of geological time, barely a flicker in their long observation. I saw my entire life compressed into a moment, birth to present, and continuing forward to my death decades in the future. They showed me other people too, hikers and ranchers and indigenous peoples who'd encountered the orbs over centuries. Some had worshipped them as spirits or gods. Others had feared them as demons or aliens. But the orbs were neither divine nor malevolent. They were simply observers, recording the story of Earth with patience that spanned millions of years. The vision ended and the orbs dispersed, floating away in different directions, resuming their endless observation. I sat down heavily, trying to process what I'd experienced. My scientific training fought with what I'd just witnessed, trying to find a rational explanation. But some experiences can't be rationalized, can only be accepted or denied. I hiked out the next morning and filed a report that was deliberately vague. I described unusual atmospheric phenomena, possibly related to geological activity or electromagnetic anomalies. I recommended continued observation, but no intervention. My superiors accepted this, filed it away, and the lights continued to be reported periodically with no official acknowledgement of what they might be. I never returned to that part of the park. I finished my last 2 years working visitor centers and maintaining developed trails, avoiding the deep backcountry, where the orbs conducted their eternal observation. Because I understood something now that I couldn't unknow. We're being watched, recorded, documented by something that sees us the way we see bacteria under a microscope. The orbs aren't concerned with our lives or deaths, our triumphs or failures. They're recording the long story of Earth, the geological and biological changes that play out over millions of years. We're just a brief chapter in that story. A species that appeared will someday disappear and will be remembered only in whatever format the orbs use to store their endless observations. It's humbling and terrifying in equal measure to know that everything we do, everything we are, is being observed and recorded by something so far beyond our understanding that we can barely perceive its existence. To know that long after we're gone, those orbs will still be here, still watching, still recording whatever comes after us. I retired last year and moved to a small town in Colorado. I still hike occasionally, but I avoid remote areas at night because I know what's out there in the darkness, floating through the wilderness, observing everything with patience that measures time and eons. The orbs are still in Big Bend, still watching, still recording. They'll be there long after the Park Service is gone, long after humans are extinct, long after our cities have eroded to dust. They are the ultimate witnesses, the eternal observers, and they've seen everything the Earth has been and will see everything it becomes. And knowing I'm one tiny moment in their infinite observation, one brief flicker of consciousness they're documenting along with everything else, it changes how you see yourself and your place in the universe. We think we're observers of nature, scientists and rangers documenting the world around us. But we're the observed, not the observers. We're specimens in someone else's study, subjects in a research project that's been running for millions of years and will continue for millions more. That's what I learned in the Chisos Mountains. That's what the orbs showed me. And it's a truth I'll carry until my death, which they've already observed and already recorded, already filed away in whatever vast repository holds the complete history of our planet. If you discovered that every moment of your life was being observed and recorded by something beyond human understanding, would it change how you live, or would you continue as before? Thanks for tuning in to Park Ranger Files. If these stories made you think twice about your next camping trip, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. I post new wilderness encounters every week that'll make you question what's really out there in the wild places. And drop a comment below telling me which story disturbed you the most and why. I read every single one. And if you've had your own unexplained experience in the wilderness, share it. You never know. Your story might be featured in a future episode. Share this video with your hiking buddies, your camping crew, or anyone who thinks they know everything about nature. The wilderness is older and stranger than we imagine, and sometimes the best survival skill is knowing when to turn back. Stay safe out there, stay aware, and remember, not everything in the forest is what it seems.